Schaeffer of Cato. I'd like to introduce you to Beth Powers, our founder. She was able to be with us tonight. She's going to do the introductions. Beth?
Thank you, Jan. And Adam, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you all of you who have logged on for this webinar. This is one of my favorite topics, which is school choice and private schooling. And I want to give you just a little bit of a bio update for Adam. But before I do that, Jan always allows me to plug Liberty in America before we get started. So please email us if you're interested in having others on the mailing list, and if you'd like to participate in our webinars, or if you'd like us to come to events where we will do Liberty education programs and bring our Liberty bus and have a lot of fun. So that's our little plug. And now we'll go to Adam Schaeffer, who is a policy scholar for the Cato Institute. The Cato Institute is a think tank that's located in Washington, D.C., and they do terrific work on the concept of liberty and freedom, economic freedom, civil liberties, and of course, in this particular case, educational choice. Adam is a former NRI Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, another fine institution, and an adjunct scholar at the Mackinac Center for Public Policy. He has commented on a range of political issues in publications such as the Wall Street Journal, the National Review Online, and RealClearPolitics. He has his PhD in American politics from the University of Virginia and his MA in social science from the University of Chicago. We were talking a little bit before the broadcast started, and Adam has been spending a lot of time on work relative to the financial burden of public schools on state and federal budgets. And it's his belief that actively engaged citizens understand these issues much better than state and federal policymakers in many cases. So he's devoted a lot of his time to doing education programs like this for Liberty groups and Tea Party groups and any other groups that are interested in hearing him speak. And Adam is going to talk a little bit, or maybe a lot, about the concept of educational freedom versus school choice. And he views that as being very different, and I'm excited to have him talk about it, especially given the fact that we operate under a 90% government monopoly right now when it comes to school education. Our government is both our regulator, our administrator, our supplier, and of course the taxing official that provides the funding for 90% of our students that are getting an education in this country. And my personal philosophy is that liberty would not be in the mess it's in this country if we had a lot more private education. So Adam, thank you so much for joining us. Take it away.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate being here. Thank you to Liberty in America and all of you for putting this on. I am going to switch over here and show my screen for you.
There it is.
Again, my name is Adam Schaeffer. I'm just going to minimize one thing here and start over. My name is Adam Schaeffer, policy analyst at the Cato Institute. I've been researching school choice policy for years now and looking very closely at this from a policy perspective and a political perspective and a messaging perspective. And I really hope that this is valuable to you tonight and for your work going out and talking to fellow citizens and legislators. You're the ones who are on the ground, and as Beth pointed out, I've been really focused on trying to talk to people like yourselves across the country as much as possible, because I think you get the threats and the opportunities that are out there. You get how important this is as an issue. So why do we need to reform education? This is probably obvious to most of you, but I think it bears reviewing. I think education reform is the most important issue that we face at the state and local level. We have other fish to fry at the federal level. But first and foremost, expanding freedom. We need to get to a situation where parents and taxpayers control what students learn, not special interests or government bureaucrats. And it's shocking to me that in America, the government doesn't control the media yet, but it has for a very long time controlled what students learn in class. And you know, with enough control over what enough generations of students learn, you can change a culture wholesale. And I think we've seen the fruits of some of that in recent years, but there is still time, I think, to get that back. We need to end government control of curriculum and the expansion of the welfare state through government schools. This is an important aspect, I think, of government schooling. There's a huge focus on expanding the size and scope of government through the schools, housing, health services there, social services in general. We will never succeed in defending and expanding liberty without reclaiming control of education from the government. I see this as the central issue in terms of liberty. Control state and local spending. We will never get control of state and local spending without addressing education. It's by far the biggest burden on those budgets. Nothing comes close. It consumes nearly 50% of every state and local tax dollar. So we can't get control of government spending and the size of state and local government without reforming education. I think it's helpful to put some numbers on this. And usually people talk about Medicaid as the big budget buster at the state level. And certainly the costs have increased recently, and they're set to go up through the roof with Obamacare in a couple of years. But it's helpful, I think, to compare what we spend at the state and local level on Medicaid, which is the blue line here, the blue block. 15% it's projected in 2012, 13% this year. That's 15% of all state and local tax revenue. This is education, nearly half. It's something that I think a lot of people, even politicians who deal with this on a yearly basis, don't quite appreciate how huge a structural issue education spending is. It's just massive. Spending hundreds of billions of dollars every year, about $600 billion a year on K-12 education alone. And the share that it's taken over the years has increased. The state level, the share that K-12 education consumes has increased 92%. Increased 75% at the local level between 1992 and 2011. That means budgets are more and more constrained by what is devoted to K-12 education. So we, I think, all can agree there's a problem, but what is the best policy solution? A lot of people talk about charter schools. It's been a popular topic of discussion. Perhaps you're a little bit leery of them now that our President Obama has said so many nice things about it. But they are the compromise solution. They're a compromise solution for a very important reason, and that reason is why I think they are inadequate. They're still government schools. A state board has to approve what it thinks is an appropriate education for a child, not the parents, not the taxpayers who fit the bill. The government controls the entire process. It's vulnerable to re-regulation and unionization. You know, when we started out 100 years ago with publicly funded schools, they were not heavily regulated. It took time, and charter schools will be re-regulated. No religious schools are allowed. Again, they're still government schools, so the restrictions on them are the same as for traditional public schools. And they still compel support. They still compel citizens to support education that they might vehemently disagree with. And they're still more expensive than private schools. A lot of people talk about how charter schools are less expensive than traditional schools. That is true. Traditional public schools spend on average in this country around $12,000 or $13,000. Private schools, in contrast, charge about $6,000, and that's a typical private school. Many private schools charge far less and spend about $8,000. So they're still more expensive than private schools. Charter schools aren't the solution. What about vouchers? And many of you who have looked into school choice have probably heard of vouchers. This is the most talked about solution, and for good reason. It was first floated by Milton Friedman in the 1950s. And it's been a main focus of school choice promoters over the years and currently as well. The problem here as well, though, the government still runs the system and distributes the money. And what that means is that there is usually associated with voucher programs huge increase in regulations, curriculum control over private schools. We've seen this in every voucher program that's passed. For instance, the new Indiana voucher program, many school choice policy people have lauded as a huge increase in school choice. Unfortunately, it's a big step backward for educational freedom in my mind. It puts private schools under the explicit authority of the State Department of Education. They're required to take state tests. They're graded on the same basis as state schools. And Indiana is part of the national curriculum movement, the Common Core. So if we get national standards, private schools will be judged under national standards. Over time, we've seen in other countries, this means that private schools become private in name only. And they look very much like regular public schools. With government money comes government control is the bottom line. They also still compel support. So in the case of vouchers that go to religious schools, each taxpayer will be, in some small measure, supporting every educational choice made. These are often prohibited by state constitutions for that reason. State constitutions are much more restrictive than the federal constitution when it comes to sending money, state money, tax dollars to private schools. They're also relatively unpopular and controversial. Vouchers aren't the solution. Fortunately, we have something called education tax credits, which I think are the by far best in principle and in terms of politics. The money is controlled entirely by parents and taxpayers. Government never touches that money. This means that there are no or extremely low restrictions on educational freedom, do not compel support, respects taxpayer rights because a taxpayer can control his or her own money. These have never been overturned by the courts. They're popular and now uncontroversial in many states. Florida, for instance, expanded their program with support of 42% Democrats. Pennsylvania passed the full House a huge expansion of their program, 96-4%. Education tax credits are the solution, in my opinion. Just to add some visual context to my discussion of the regulations on credits and voucher programs, this is a chart I've taken from a policy analysis that Andrew Colson, the director of Cato's Center for Educational Freedom, recently published looking at the regulatory burden from voucher and credit programs. And he statistically analyzed this data and found that, in fact, voucher programs cause a very serious increase in regulation on private schools. As you can see here, the higher the number and the darker the red, the greater the increase in regulation. Starting from the left, going to the right at the top of the chart, barriers to entry, delivery, staffing, price, religion, curriculum, testing, finance, and administration. You see quite clearly vouchers impose far more regulations and restrictions on educational freedom. So what are education tax credits? I mentioned them. I said these are the solution, but many people have not heard of them or are not very familiar with them. And tax credits directly reduce the amount a taxpayer owes the government, or your tax liability. It comes off the bill that the government charges you. It doesn't come off your taxable income. So what this means is they're very powerful. They can have a very powerful impact. Say you owe $3,000 in state income taxes and you spend $3,000 on private education. 3,000 minus 3,000 equals 0. You would owe the state $0 in taxes. You can spend your own money on your own child. Or you can donate that money to help a lower income child. Businesses can